In 1893, a small exploration team was sent into a section of the Black Ridge Mountains that locals avoided even in daylight. Their job was simple: chart the ridges, locate timber routes, and return within 6 weeks. What they found instead was a stretch of wilderness where sound behaved wrong, where tracks appeared overnight without explanation, and where something massive moved just beyond the tree line. None of the men who crossed into that territory were ever officially recovered. Before we continue, take 1 second to hit the like button. Subscribe if you enjoy true unexplained wilderness stories, and comment where you are watching from right now. It helps this channel more than you know. I was 26 years old when we entered Black Ridge. I had never heard the word Bigfoot spoken out loud before that journey. Not in fear, not in warning, and not in the tone I heard it spoken afterward. We left the last settlement before sunrise with 3 pack mules, 6 men, and enough confidence to believe maps could still protect us. By nightfall of the first day, the forest had already decided that we did not belong. The first thing I noticed after we left the river was how quickly the forest swallowed sound. Our boots still crushed leaves and snapped twigs, but everything beyond a few yards felt muted, as if the trees themselves were absorbing the noise. I walked third in line behind Marcus and Daniel. Behind me were Eli, Thomas, and our guide, Henry Calder, who brought up the rear with his rifle always half raised, never resting on his shoulder. We had crossed into Black Ridge just after midday. The river bent away behind us like it was relieved to be rid of us. The slope climbed fast. Pines thickened, light thinned. The air turned colder, even though the sun still rode high. Marcus called back over his shoulder. "Feels like we walked into a cellar." Daniel laughed, but his laugh sounded wrong in that space. Too loud, too thin. Henry did not laugh. "Keep your voices down," he said. "Sound carries strange in these hills." By late afternoon, the ground grew uneven and steep. Roots crisscrossed the earth like the bones of something buried and trying to crawl back out. Thomas slipped once and caught himself on a low branch. When he pulled his hand away, his palm was smeared with sap that smelled sharp and bitter. "Trees bleeding out here," he muttered. We reached our first camp just before dusk in a shallow bowl between 2 low ridges. It should have been noisy with insects and evening birds, but there was nothing. No crickets, no wings, just the soft breath of the wind sliding through the upper branches. Eli noticed it first. "You hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" Marcus replied. "Exactly," Eli said. "We built a small fire. Too small for comfort," Henry insisted. "No big flames in this country," he told us. "Light attracts more than warmth." Daniel opened a tin of beans and passed it around with hard bread. Nobody complained about the cold food. Hunger overruled pride. I ate slowly and watched the dark thicken at the edge of the firelight. Beyond that weak glow, the trees stood packed tight, their trunks like endless black bars. Henry walked a slow circle around camp while we ate. When he returned, his face had changed. "Tracks on the far side," he said. "Fresh." Marcus asked what made them. Henry took his time answering. "Nothing I care to name." Later, when the fire burned low, something moved outside the ring of light. Not fast, heavy, deliberate. I heard the rhythm of it before I heard the sound itself. Step, pause, step, as if the thing walking was counting its own movements. Daniel reached for his rifle. Henry caught his wrist and pushed it down. "Not yet," he whispered. The footsteps circled us once, then again. I could feel the weight of whatever it was pressing against my chest without ever touching me. My mouth went dry. My hands shook so badly I had to press them into my knees to steady them. Thomas whispered a prayer under his breath that I did not recognize. Then the steps stopped. The silence afterward felt worse than the sound had been. It felt intentional, like whatever stood out there had chosen the stillness. Henry spoke into the darkness. "You have the woods. We do not challenge you." His voice was calm but tight. The fire cracked. A spark lifted and died. Something exhaled beyond the trees. Deep, wet, too slow to be a normal breath. Then the steps retreated. None of us slept that night. We took turns sitting upright with our backs to the trees, watching the dark until our eyes ached from strain. At dawn, the fire was dead, the ashes cold. Henry crouched at the edge of camp and studied the ground. "It stood here," he said, pointing to a deep impression in the soil. The print was wider than my boot by several inches. 5 blunt toe marks pressed into the dirt without any sign of claws. Marcus swore quietly. "That is no bear." Henry looked up at the ridge above us. "And that is not the last time it will follow us." We packed without speaking. When we left that bowl behind, I felt the weight return immediately at our backs. We had not been chased. We had had been marked, and whatever owned Black Ridge now knew exactly where we were headed. We climbed for most of that morning without speaking. Black Ridge rose in long, uneven shelves that forced us into narrow passes, where the trees pressed so close together, our packs scraped bark on both sides. The deeper we moved, the heavier the air felt. Not thicker, heavier, like the mountain itself was leaning down on our shoulders. Daniel broke the silence first. "Feels like something's wrong with the wind." I listened. He was right. It did not move clean through the branches. It stuttered, shifted direction without warning, carried sound in one moment and swallowed it the next. Henry stopped at a narrow stream cutting across the path. "Water break," he said. "Stay close." We knelt along the bank and drank. The water was clear, cold enough to sting. As I lifted my head, I noticed the stones on the far side of the stream were stacked. 5 of them, small to large, placed carefully. Thomas followed my gaze. "Those weren't like that yesterday," he whispered. Before anyone could answer, a stone struck the ground a few yards uphill from us. It did not bounce, it landed with purpose. We all froze. Another followed, then a third, not thrown wildly, placed, a warning. Marcus raised his rifle halfway. Henry pushed it down again. "Not yet," he said for the second time. His voice shook now. "They want us to move." We moved. By midday, the forest changed. The pines thinned and gave way to tall, straight trunks, stripped of bark, in long, vertical scars far above any man's reach. The smell hit us next, a sour, wet musk that settled into the throat and refused to leave. Daniel gagged once and spat. "That smell is alive." Thomas fell back beside me. "My uncle hunted these ridges when I was a boy," he said quietly. "He said some places don't belong to men, no matter how many years pass." I did not ask what happened to his uncle. I already suspected the answer. The first call came just after the climb steepened, a low broken sound that rolled through the trees like breath forced through a massive chest. It was answered seconds later from farther up the ridge. 2 voices, speaking to each other. Eli stopped walking. "That is not an animal," he said. Branches snapped uphill, then downhill. They were moving around us now, controlling the space, driving us where they wanted us to go. Then we saw it, just for a moment. Between 2 tree trunks on the left ridge, a shape stepped into partial light, taller than any man I had ever seen, shoulders thick like stacked stone. Its arms hung too long. Dark hair covered its frame in uneven waves. Its face stayed hidden, but I felt its eyes on us with a pressure that made my vision blur. Daniel whispered the word none of us had spoken yet. Bigfoot. The shape withdrew without a sound. Panic tried to take us then. I felt it rising in my chest like a flood. Marcus nearly ran. Henry caught him by the collar and shoved him back into line. "They want fear," Henry hissed. "Fear makes you stupid." We pushed higher until the ridge narrowed into stone shelves that dropped sharply on either side. The calls returned, louder now, closer. The smaller one answered, the larger with shorter, sharper sounds. Eli stumbled when a stone struck near his boot. Another hit Daniel's pack and tore the canvas clean open. They were not trying to kill us yet. They were testing us. We reached a narrow ledge just before dusk. Beyond it, the mountain fell away into a wide, dark basin filled with tangled forest. Henry took one look at it and swore. "They're herding us." The ground behind us shifted. A log rolled down across the trail we had come from and slammed into the rocks with a crack that echoed through the basin. No accident, no chance. Trapped. The calls stopped all at once. The sudden silence pressed against my ears until they rang. Then movement. Multiple shapes along the tree line above the basin. One larger than the rest stepped forward. The Bigfoot was no longer hiding from us. It stood in full view. Marcus dropped to his knees without being told. Eli followed. One by one, we all did. Henry lowered his rifle and placed it on the stone in front of him. I copied the movement with shaking hands. The creature watched us for a long time. Then it raised one massive arm and pointed toward the far side of the basin. It was not offering freedom. It was issuing a direction, and every instinct in my body told me that whatever waited on the other side was worse than anything we had seen so far. We obeyed because there was no other choice. We descended into the basin as the last light drained from the sky. The slope was steep and choked with brush. Every step sent loose stones sliding into the dark below us. I kept my eyes locked on Henry's boots in front of me, terrified that one wrong move would send me tumbling into whatever waited at the bottom. The forest inside the basin was wrong. The trees grew closer together, but the ground beneath them was almost bare. No fallen branches, no undergrowth, just dark earth stamped flat like a trail that had been walked too many times by something too heavy. Daniel whispered, "This is a den." No one argued. The calls did not follow us down. That frightened me more than if they had. The silence meant they already knew where we were going. We reached the floor of the basin just as full darkness settled settled in. Henry ordered no fire, not even a spark. We huddled close together beneath a massive, twisted root system that rose from the earth like the ribs of something long dead. The air down there was warmer and thick with that same wet animal smell. Time stretched strangely in the dark. Minutes felt like hours. Every small noise sounded enormous. Thomas's breathing, Marcus shifting his weight, the soft slide of stone somewhere deeper in the basin that none of us had caused. Then something answered it, a low thud, then another. Heavy footsteps moving in slow, wide circles far beyond what we could see. I could tell from the rhythm that it was not alone, at least two, possibly more. Daniel leaned close to my ear. If they rush us, do we fire? My mouth was too dry to answer. Henry whispered, barely louder than thought, only if one of them takes a man, not before. Something brushed against the outer edge of the root system, not a branch, too thick, too smooth. I watched in helpless horror as a massive shadow passed slowly through the faint starlight filtering between the trees. A shoulder, an arm, the curve of a back wider than a barrel. The shape stopped just beyond our hiding place. We could smell it now. Wet earth, rot, old blood. Another shape moved on the far side. Smaller, quicker. I realized with sick clarity that these were not scouts anymore. This was a family group. They had brought the young. A low clicking sound passed between them. Communication, coordination, Marcus whimpered before he could stop himself. Everything froze. The clicks stopped. The basin felt like it was holding its breath with us. Then the heavy thing stepped closer. A massive hand closed around one of the twisted roots above us. The wood creaked under its grip. Dirt fell into my hair. I stared up at fingers thicker than my wrist, wrapped around ancient wood like it was nothing. Thomas lost control. He bolted. He made it 3 steps before the forest exploded. The Bigfoot moved faster than anything that large should be able to move. One instant it was above us. The next it was on him. I saw Thomas lifted clear off the ground with one violent motion. His scream cut off when he hit the creature's chest. Henry fired. The gunshot shattered the basin. The bullet struck hair and muscle and vanished without slowing the creature. It roared then, a deep, thunderous sound that punched the air out of my lungs. The smaller shapes rushed forward from the dark. Daniel fired. Marcus fired. I fired. The creature holding Thomas recoiled, not in pain, but in fury. It hurled him aside like broken cargo. His body struck a tree with a hollow sound and collapsed. Then Henry grabbed my pack and screamed, "Run, now!" We ran. The basin erupted into chaos. Branches shattered behind us. Footsteps thundered through the dark like an avalanche of living stone. The smaller ones raced alongside, invisible but terrifyingly fast. One of them slapped Marcus from the side. He flew hard into the dirt and did not move. I kept running. Eli screamed somewhere behind me. Then that scream broke. Daniel was at my side. "Do not stop," he gasped. "Do not look back." The ground pitched upward without warning. As we burst out of the basin and onto another steep climb, my legs burned. My lungs felt like they were tearing. The forest blurred into streaks of black and gray. Behind us, the roars multiplied. They were no longer guiding us. They were hunting us, and the mountain had finally decided which of us it was going to keep. We did not slow until the slope broke our lungs and forced us to. I stumbled over a root and went down hard, sliding several feet before Daniel dragged me upright by my collar. My legs shook so badly I could barely stand. We had burst into a thinner stretch of timber high above the basin, where the trees twisted and leaned from constant wind. The roaring behind us faded into distance, not gone, but no longer right on our backs. Henry took a head count with shaking hands. "Me, you, Daniel, Eli." His voice cracked when he said the next names. Marcus, Thomas. No answers came. We stood in a tight cluster, every man staring into the trees like something might still step out at any second. My ears rang with blood and fear. I had never felt silence that loud before. "We cannot leave them," Eli said. His face was pale gray in the weak starlight. Henry closed his eyes briefly. "Thomas is already dead. I heard his spine go." The words landed like stones. Marcus might still be alive. We moved back down the slope a short distance, slow and quiet, every step feeling like a betrayal of survival instinct. We found Marcus where he had fallen. His body lay twisted at the base of a hemlock, one leg bent wrong beneath him. His chest still moved, shallow, wet. Daniel knelt beside him. "Marcus?" No response. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Henry felt for a pulse and nodded once. "We carry him." It took all 4 of us. Every few steps I expected the forest to explode again. Every snapped twig made my heart seize. We made it less than 50 yards before Marcus stirred. His eyes rolled wildly. He tried to speak, and a red foam spilled from his lips. Then he screamed. The answering roar came instantly from below. They were still close. Henry made the decision without hesitation. He took Marcus's face in both hands. "I am sorry," he said, and drove the knife under his ribs. The scream stopped mid-breath. For a moment, no one moved. Eli retched violently into the brush. Daniel stared at Henry like he did not recognize him anymore. "We cannot carry the dying," Henry said. "They will follow the sound." The roar came closer. We ran again. The climb grew brutal. Rock replaced soil. The wind cut through our clothes, freezing the sweat on our backs. The trees thinned until only twisted scrub clung to the slope. Somewhere high above us, stone gleamed faintly in moonlight. The ridgeline. We burst onto the open rock just before full dawn broke. Wind slammed into us so hard I nearly lost my footing. The world opened wide, endless dark hills rolling away below. For one terrible moment, hope returned. Then we saw them. 3 shapes stood on the ridge ahead of us, silhouetted against the coming light. One massive, 2 smaller, flanking it. The elder stood taller than any of the others we had seen. Its outline was unmistakable. Wide chest, long arms, a presence that seemed to weigh on the air itself. We skidded to a halt. Behind us, the lower slope erupted with movement. More shadows climbing, cutting off retreat. We were trapped between them. The elder raised one arm slowly, not in threat, but in command. The 2 beside it shifted apart, widening a narrow path between them. Eli fell to his knees without being told. I followed. Daniel followed. Henry hesitated only a second before lowering himself last. We set our rifles down on the stone. My hands shook so violently I could barely keep my palms open. The elder stepped closer. I could see its eyes now. Dark, intelligent, not wild. Another shape moved behind it, smaller. The young one we had seen before. It peered at us with open curiosity, making a soft clicking sound. The elder extended its arm and pointed not back toward the basin but toward a narrow descent cutting off the far side of the ridge. A way out. Henry spoke softly. "We will go. We will never return." The elder watched him for several long seconds. Then it lowered its arm. The shapes behind us stopped advancing. A corridor opened through the ridge. We rose slowly, never lifting our weapons. We passed between them with the wind tearing at our clothes, and the mountain stretching into endless fall beyond the rock. I felt the young one's gaze on my back the entire time. When we reached the descent and began to drop out of sight, the elder released one final low call. It was not anger, it was warning and mercy. We followed the river east for most of that morning without speaking. Our boots were soaked, our hands were numb. Every muscle in my body felt shredded from the night before. Daniel walked like a man twice his age. Henry kept checking the tree line behind us every few dozen steps, always expecting to see movement where there should not be any. The forest here felt different, still dangerous, still wild, but the pressure was gone. That invisible weight that had crushed the air inside Black Ridge had lifted. We were outside their territory. At least that is what we wanted to believe. Near midday, Daniel collapsed. Not a stumble, not a slip. He simply folded where he stood and hit the ground like his strings had been cut. Henry knelt beside him and checked his pulse. "He is alive," he said, "but he is breaking." We dragged Daniel into the shade beneath a leaning pine. His skin burned with fever. His lips trembled uncontrollably. He kept whispering Marcus's name over and over again, like a loop his mind could not escape. Henry stared at the river. "We cannot carry him like this for long." That was when I smelled it again. The same wet animal stink, faint but unmistakable. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Henry," I whispered, "do you smell that?" He did not answer immediately. Slowly, he turned his head toward the trees across the river. Then the water rippled, not from wind, not from current, from something stepping into it upstream. A massive shape entered the river just beyond the bend where the water darkened. Only its legs were visible at first, thick, hair darkened with moisture. The water barely reached its knees. Daniel screamed. The creature stopped moving. Another shape appeared behind it on the bank, then another. 3 silhouettes through the thin mist, watching, waiting. Henry stood slowly. He raised his hands again, just like on the ridge. "We are leaving," he said quietly. "We are already leaving." The main shape tilted its head. It did not advance. It did not retreat. It stood in the water like a living wall. Daniel tried to crawl backward and shrieked in pain when his legs failed him. The sound echoed off the riverbank and into the trees. That was when the smaller one moved. It darted out of the brush on the far side with terrifying speed, not charging, circling, testing. Henry swung his rifle up halfway, then froze. The big one growled, low, controlled, warning. Henry lowered the rifle immediately. The big one stepped back out of the river. It turned once and struck the water with the side of its massive arm. The impact sent a wave rushing toward us that soaked our legs in freezing shock. Then it walked back into the trees. The smaller one followed. The third shape lingered for one long second at the edge of the water. I could feel its eyes on me. Then it vanished as well. The forest went silent again. Daniel collapsed into sobs. Henry knelt beside him and gripped his shoulders. "They are not hunting," he said. "They are escorting." The word chilled me more than any roar ever had. That afternoon, Daniel's condition worsened. Fever climbed, his eyes unfocused. He muttered fragments of screams and shadow and hands pulling him backward through trees. By evening, he could no longer stand. Henry and I built a small fire far from the tree line and kept it low. The river roared loud beside us. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, he gripped my wrist hard enough to bruise. "They do not kill fast," he whispered. "They take you apart while you live." I did not sleep that night. Near dawn, Daniel stopped breathing. Henry checked him once and then closed his eyes. "It is done." We buried him beside the river beneath loose stones and wet earth. No marker, no prayer, just silence. Now only two of us remained, Henry and me. As the sun climbed over the tree line, I realized with cold certainty that the mountain had not lost interest in us. It was simply finished choosing. We walked in silence for most of that day, two sets of footsteps now, where six had once moved together. The river stayed on our right like a narrow guide back to the human world. But even with that steady sound beside us, the feeling of being watched never fully left. It was weaker now, distant, like eyes seen through fog, but it was still there. By late afternoon, Henry finally spoke. "I lied to you at the beginning." I stopped walking. He did not turn around. "I was not hired only to guide. I was paid to make sure none of you turned back." The words hit harder than any roar. "You knew," I said. "You knew what lived up there." Henry nodded once. I had seen them before, not this group, not this ridge, but the same kind. My mouth went dry. "How many expeditions?" He took a slow breath. This was the 5th in 15 years. The world tilted slightly as that sank in. They called the first one a mining survey that went missing in 81, then a logging party in 86, then a hunting patrol in 90, then a mapping crew in 92. Every report blamed terrain, weather, accidents, bears, always bears. "And none of them came back," I said. "Some did," Henry replied quietly. Broken, silent, afraid to speak. I felt sick. "Then why send us?" Henry finally turned to face me. His eyes looked older than they had any right to be. "Because the companies would not stop, and someone had to guide the path away from full exposure." "Exposure to what?" I asked. "To the truth," he said, "that this land does not belong to us anymore, and maybe never did." We camped early that night near a line of dead trees twisted into strange shapes by lightning long ago. Henry kept the fire barely alive. I sat with my rifle across my knees, but did not bother aiming it anywhere. If they came again, I already knew it would not matter. That was when Henry told me everything. He described finding stacked stones miles apart that matched one another perfectly. Bark stripped in identical patterns across different ridges. Entire deer herds disappearing for months at a time. And once, years ago, seeing a juvenile carried on the back of a massive adult as calmly as a child riding a father's shoulders. "They are not beasts," he said. "They are a people." I shook my head. "They killed my friends. They defend their young," Henry answered. "The same way we would." The fire popped softly between us. "Why did they let us live?" I asked. Henry stared into the flame. "Because you knelt. Because you dropped your weapon? Because you did not look at the young one with hunger or hate? That mattered." Silence settled again. Near midnight, the river changed its sound. Not louder, not softer, closer. Henry sat upright. "We are not alone." A shadow moved on the far bank, then another. Two shapes, standing just inside the tree line, watching through the dark. "They followed us all this way," I whispered. "They followed to make sure we kept going," Henry said. One of the shapes stepped forward just enough for moonlight to touch its shoulder. Then it raised one arm slowly and pointed further east along the river. It was not a threat. It was an instruction. Henry rose and shouldered his pack. "At first light, we move exactly where they pointed, not one step off." I stared at the dark silhouettes. "And if we do?" "They let us live out our days," he said. "If we do not, there will be no burial stones this time." The shapes retreated without sound. Sleep never came that night. I sat awake until dawn, with the river rushing beside me and the knowledge settling deep into my bones that survival now depended not on maps or weapons, but on obedience to something older than any border or company claim. We moved at first light exactly as the shape had directed. The river curved east through a narrow channel of rock and broken timber. The ground here was treacherous. Mud sucked at our boots. Fallen trees formed unstable bridges that groaned under our weight. Every step felt like another chance to make a fatal mistake. Henry walked in front. I followed 2 paces behind him. Neither of us spoke. Words felt dangerous. The forest changed again before midday. The trees thinned, the air dried, the wet animal stink faded until it was only a memory in the back of my throat. For the first time since Black Ridge, I felt the faintest hint of relief. That was when Henry made the mistake. We reached a fork where a smaller stream cut off sharply to the south. It flowed faster than the main river and disappeared between steep stone walls. Henry stopped and studied it. "That water runs faster," he said. "We could reach settlement sooner if we follow it." My stomach tightened. "They told us east." Henry hesitated, only for a moment. "They guided us out of their territory, not all the way home." Before I could stop him, he stepped into the southern stream. The forest answered immediately. A massive crash erupted upriver. Branches exploded, stone shattered. The water surged unnaturally as something huge entered the current with force that displaced the flow. Henry froze. The water bulged as a dark shape moved beneath the surface against the current, impossible in size and power. Then it rose. The Bigfoot stood chest deep in the river, less than 20 yards from us. Its wet hair clung in thick ropes to a frame that looked carved from the mountain itself. Its eyes locked onto Henry with absolute focus. Another shape appeared on the far bank, then another. They had not left us. They had been walking with us the entire time, just out of sight. Henry dropped to his knees in the water instantly. "We obey," he said loudly. "We return to the east." The creature did not move. The water boiled around its legs from the force of the current breaking against it. Then it lifted one massive arm and pointed again toward the main river. This time the gesture carried anger. Henry backed out of the stream slowly, trembling violently. I pulled him the rest of the way onto the bank. The moment his boots cleared the water, the creature dropped back beneath the surface. The current surged once, then settled. The other shapes vanished into the trees without sound. Henry sat on the ground, shaking so hard I thought his bones would rattle apart. "That was the last warning," he whispered. We followed the main river without question after that. By late afternoon, the forest began to open. The trees thinned into scattered groves. Wind moved freely through wide grass. The mountains behind us rose like dark walls in the distance. Then we saw smoke, thin, gray, human. I had never felt such dangerous hope in my life. We crossed open ground toward the smoke, terrified that the shapes would appear again and drive us back, but nothing followed. No calls, no movement, no pressure in the air, just silence. At the edge of a wide clearing, we found a broken cabin near the riverbank. Old, abandoned, half-collapsed, but unmistakably built by human hands. Rusted traps lay scattered near the entrance. A sun-bleached canoe rested upside down in the weeds. Henry dropped to his knees again, this time from exhaustion. "We crossed the boundary," he said. I stared back at the distant tree line. "They let us go." Henry shook his head slowly. "They finished escorting us." We slept inside that ruined cabin that night. For the first time in weeks, walls separated us from the forest. I still did not sleep much. Every sound outside still made my heart race. Near dawn, I heard a single low call echo faintly from far away in the mountains. Not a threat, a reminder. They knew exactly where we were. We left the abandoned cabin at sunrise, walking with stiff legs and hollow bodies. The river widened and the air warmed as we followed its curve. For the first time since entering Black Ridge, birds returned. Not many, not loud, but enough to remind me what normal sounded like. After everything we had seen, it felt almost unreal. By mid-morning, the trees parted and revealed a shallow valley cut with a dirt road, a real road, wheel tracks carved into mud, human movement. Henry stared at it like a man who had spotted a ghost. "We made it," he said, voice thin. "You and me." We followed the road east until my legs felt numb. Hours later, a small trading shack appeared at a bend in the path. Smoke curled from its chimney. Tools hung on the outer wall. A dog slept on the porch, and for a moment, I feared even it would sense what we carried with us and attack. It only lifted its head and watched us approach. A man stepped out onto the porch as we neared, broad shoulders, weathered hands, a stranger's caution in his eyes. His gaze swept over our torn clothes, the dried blood on our sleeves, the mud caked to our boots. "Where in the hell did you two walk out of?" he asked. Henry answered before I could. "Black Ridge." The man's expression changed instantly. Not fear, recognition. "Anyone else with you?" Henry shook his head. "No." The man nodded once, slowly, like he had expected that answer. "Come inside. You look half dead." We stepped into the single-room store. It smelled of tobacco, cured meat, and dust. A stove burned in the corner. Henry lowered himself into a chair, like his body finally understood it could stop moving. The man handed me a tin cup of water. "You boys see anything up there?" Henry hesitated, then answered too quickly. "No, terrain was rough. Weather worse. Lost the others in a slide." The lie hung in the room like smoke. The man studied him with unsettling calm. "Sure," he said. "Slides happen up there all the time." His tone told me he did not believe a word of it. He looked at me next. Him, he said, nodding toward Henry. He's been in these mountains a long time. He knows what he's doing. Then his gaze sharpened. But you look like you saw something you wish you hadn't. My throat locked. Images of Thomas, Marcus, Daniel, and Eli flashed behind my eyes. The basin, the ridge, the young one stepping out from behind the elder. I don't know what I saw, I said quietly. That is the right answer, the man replied. He gave us dried meat, blankets, and a place to sit while he prepared a horse to take us to the next settlement. Henry barely spoke. He kept staring out the window toward the tree line like he expected the shapes to appear again and drag us back. As we rode toward town, people stared at us from doorways, some with concern, some with suspicion. None approached. When we finally reached the settlement, a company representative met us at the small station. His expression tightened when he saw there were only two of us. He asked Henry for a detailed account of what happened. Henry told the same lie. Slide, fog, lost the trail, terrain collapse. The man accepted it with polite neutrality, wrote notes in a small ledger, and dismissed us as if we were an inconvenience rather than the last surviving members of a doomed expedition. But he never asked the question any normal man would. What did you really see? That was when I understood something terrifying. Many already knew. They knew expeditions vanished. They knew the mountains held things bigger and older than stories, and they preferred silence over truth. That evening, as we sat in a boarding house with a weak fire and thin blankets, Henry finally spoke again. They will send another team, he said. Why? I asked. After 5 failed attempts, they cannot leave land unclaimed, he said bitterly. Not in their world. I stared at my hands, still trembling days later. And what about their world? Henry looked at the window. We were told to leave, and we did. Their world stays theirs as long as men like us stay quiet. But sleep did not come for me that night, because even far from the ridge, even with walls and human voices around me, I could still feel the eyes of the young one watching from behind the elder's arm. Not anger, not revenge, but memory, a connection I had not asked for, one I knew would follow me for the rest of my life. The weeks after our return passed in a blur I still cannot fully separate. My body healed faster than my mind. The cuts closed, the bruises faded, but sleep never came clean again. Every night I woke to the sound of breath that was not mine, to footsteps that were not there, to the feeling of something standing just beyond the edge of the room, patient and watching. Henry changed faster than I did. He stopped guiding altogether, refused every offer, refused every question. The few times I saw him in town after that, he looked thinner, sharper, like a man hollowed out and filled only with vigilance. He never stayed anywhere long, never slept the same place twice in a row. One evening, a month after Black Ridge, I found him sitting on the riverbank outside town, staring into the current. They followed us further than they were supposed to, he said without turning. What do you mean? I asked. They were not just escorting, he replied. They were watching how we live. That chill returned, the same one I had felt on the ridge. They stayed near town, Henry nodded. For a time, that was when the disappearances began. Not expeditions, not survey crews, individuals. A trapper found dead near his cabin with no sign of struggle, and every bone inside him crushed. A child who wandered too far into the tree line and was never found. A hunter whose rifle was discovered snapped clean in half beside a set of footprints wider than any man's. The town blamed bears. The papers blamed weather. Henry and I knew better. One night he came to my door soaked in rain and shaking violently. They crossed the river, he said. I saw one of them on the far bank. They never cross, I whispered. They do now, he said. Something changed on that ridge. We followed the river upstream at first light. Deep into country no settlement had reason to touch. The deeper we went, the heavier the air became again. The silence returned in thick waves. Then we found the tracks. Not one, many, large, small, juvenile, adult. An entire group had crossed into human land. At the edge of a clearing, we found what forced Henry to sink to his knees. A body. A man from the next town over, his chest torn open, his face frozen in horror, his bones shattered inward like he had been pressed by something impossibly strong. But this time, there were no feeding marks, no marrow taken, no scavenger signs. This was not survival. This was a message. Henry whispered, "The elder is gone." I stared at him. "How can you know that?" "Because they are behaving wrong," he said. "No restraint. No escorting, no warnings." He swallowed hard. "The younger one is leading now," and I understood with sudden sick clarity what that meant. The young one we had seen, the curious one. It had grown, and it had learned. We left the body where it lay. Authorities arrived later. Bears again, always bears. That night Henry packed his gear without explanation. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To finish what should have ended on that ridge," he replied. "You will be killed. Eventually, he said, but not tonight. That was the last time I ever saw Henry Calder alive. 3 days later, I followed news downriver of a massive rock slide deep in the northern pass. No survivors, no bodies recovered, but for weeks after, the disappearances stopped. The river went quiet again, the forest loosened its grip, and I understood the final truth Henry had carried alone. The creatures of Black Ridge do not merely defend territory, they regulate balance. They remove what threatens it. Sometimes that threat is not a survey crew. Sometimes it is one of their own. Years passed before I could bring myself to look at a map of Black Ridge again. I moved twice, changed work, grew older in ways that had nothing to do with age. People who met me later in life always said the same thing, that I listened too hard to empty rooms, that I watched tree lines the way other men watched storm clouds. I never told them why. Officially, the expedition of 1893 was recorded as a partial loss due to unstable terrain and extreme weather. Henry and I were listed as lucky survivors. The others were numbers on a ledger and a few careful lines in a company archive no one would ever bother to read. But the mountains remembered them, and so did I. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the town slept, I would sit by the river at the edge of the settlement and listen. The current had its own language, but beneath it, every now and then, I heard something else, a low broken note carried from far upstream, too deep to be human, too deliberate to be accident. Every time I heard it, the hair on my arms lifted. I tried to build a life that did not revolve around what I had seen. I married once, briefly. My wife left after 2 years with a simple sentence that cut sharper than any knife. "You are here, but you are never fully here." She was right. Part of me was still kneeling on that ridge with stone under my knees and an elder's shadow falling over my shoulders. One winter, a trader from the north stopped at the settlement. He carried with him stories the way other men carried tools. He spoke of thin smoke seen rising from valleys no one had settled, of strange calls heard at night by trappers, of trees found twisted into shapes that made no natural sense. I sat in the corner and listened. At one point, he pulled a small object from his pack and set it on the table. "Found this wedged into a rock seam high above the pass," he said. "Too big for a man's hand, too heavy for simple stone." It was a tooth, long, thick, root snapped clean, the enamel worn and ridged from years of use. The size of it turned my mouth dry. The trader saw my face and smiled. "You look like you recognize it." "I do not," I lied. That night I did not sleep at all. The next morning, I walked upriver alone until the settlement was only a smudge behind me. The water ran dark and fast between frozen banks. The air bit hard at my skin. I stood there and spoke out loud to a forest that did not answer. "You won," I said. "You kept your ridges. You kept your young. You took what you needed from us, and we left." The river roared back. No reply. No shape at the tree line. No towering silhouettes. For a moment I wondered if age had turned the memory into something larger than it had been. If I had built legends around simple terror. If the elder and the young one existed only because my mind could not bear the idea of random loss. Then I saw it. Across the river, near a half-rotten stump, 5 stones sat stacked in a perfect column, largest at the bottom, smallest at the top. No snow on their upper faces despite the storm the night before. Placed, not fallen. My heartbeat slowed and then hammered. A single print marked the mud beside them. Broad, long, 5 blunt toe marks. No claws. I did not cross. I did not call out. I simply watched until the cold forced me back toward home. That was the moment I understood something final and unchanging. We had not escaped them. We had been allowed to live near the edge of their shadow, and they had never stopped watching the line where their world ended and ours began. I am old now, old enough that people do not question when I sit for hours in a chair by the window and stare at the hills beyond the town. They think I see only trees and distance. They do not know that in the shape of every ridge I see a shoulder. In every line of dark fur, I see the outline of a back turned away from us in deliberate choice. I write this account because I know my time is growing short. There are more years behind me than ahead. My hands shake when I hold a cup, but they are steady enough to move a pen across paper. The truth deserves at least that much effort. I want you to understand something that the company reports will never say. Black Ridge is not empty wilderness. It is occupied land, not by ghosts, not by stories told to frighten children, by a people who live in the spaces between our maps. They have families. They teach their young. They build markers and shelters. They hunt and store and sort. They patrol their boundaries with more discipline than any man's army. And most terrifying of all, they choose. They chose to circle our camp instead of tearing it apart on the first night. They chose to drive us into the basin rather than break our necks on the ridge. The elder chose to let us kneel and leave when he could have closed his hand and ended every one of us in seconds. Later, when the young one led its own, something inside their balance broke. The restraint thinned, the border wavered. Henry walked back into those mountains to fix a problem he believed he had helped create. Whether he died by rockslide or by their hands, I will never know, but I know this. The disappearances slowed afterward, the river quieted, the stones stopped appearing so close to town, balance restored, not by men with rifles and maps, by something older. So if you ever stand at the edge of a forest that feels too still, if you walk a ridge where all sound dies, and the air grows thick and heavy, if you find stones stacked in a place no person should have reached, I want you to remember what I am telling you now. You are not alone. You are a guest, and some guests are allowed to leave only because something in the dark decided mercy served the balance better than blood. The last time I walked to the river, not long ago, the hills were blue with distance, and the water moved slow with late summer melt. Across on the far bank, at the edge of the trees, a shape stood half-hidden, taller than a man, shoulders broad, head slightly bowed. Beside it, smaller, curious, still, the larger shape turned and vanished into the trees. The smaller one lingered a heartbeat longer. Then it raised one arm, not high, just enough that I could see the motion. A gesture I had seen once before on a stone ridge with the wind howling at my back. Direction, boundary, choice. Then it too was gone. Now I leave this story in your hands. What you do with it is no longer my responsibility. But if you have felt that same weight in the woods, if you have heard calls that no wolf or coyote could make, if you have seen prints that no bear could leave, you already know that I am not alone in what I carry. And if you are listening to this somewhere out there with your lights off and your headphones in, ask yourself one last question before you sleep. When the forest goes quiet near you, is it peace you are hearing, or is it something intelligent choosing for the moment to let you walk away? So before you go, if you want more stories that should never make it into official reports, make sure you tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what you believe is really living out there in Bigfoot territory. Because some of you already know the truth. You have heard it breathing just beyond the tree line.